guys, we're back here with part 2 of our Resident Evil video. Alright, well we're going to start off with, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you see, the effects of the Resident Evil franchise as a whole, and what it's done with gaming.
I'd say it brought in the whole entire premise of the horror, gore, scare factor for video games. To be honest, it brought in that genre. I believe no other video game pre-Resident Evil has actually touched upon it. Even though they brought in small plot points as they find the pieces of paper Steve was talking about earlier and stuff like that, you never really get the full scope of like how insidious and evil Umbrella Corporation was actually was and how vast they were. So like, cause you're in the first Resident Evil, you're basically in a mansion. You're like kind of closed off from the world and not really out there and not really seeing what like Umbrella Corporation really is. Mm-hmm. And what I thought was like what I got really into Resident Evil was actually the franchise films, because they actually showed that wide scope and how far they were willing to go and how deep their pockets were, and really that they ruled the world secretly behind corporations to get what they needed.
Do you think that's a commentary that they were making on purpose? I mean, because in a film,
on a way, I think it's a political standpoint. Mm-hmm. But I don't really buy much into political standpoints, because the thing is, like, everyone's allowed to have their opinions. I am too. But the thing is, I think political views don't need to come up in a video game, to be honest.
Well, that's fine, but what I'm getting at is, when you watch a film, it's trying to say something. You know what I mean? It's trying to give you a message. And usually it is taking a stance. This is the thought of what it's trying to say. Do you think that in the original Resident Evil, when you have this mega corporation that's building these biological weapons to kill, do you think that this is something that could be a social commentary on the world? Do you think this is something that's going to... Because, again, it's not like anything you've seen before, really. I mean, this is a very cinematic story in some regards.
This goes back to the adage of, like, when people and corporations, or countries for that matter, go unchecked. You know what I mean? They basically are allowed to do whatever they want because they have more money than God, and they think they're untouchable. I mean, when they go to that standpoint, they create things that should not be created whatsoever, other than the fact they want to see it created because they can. It's a God complex.
And it's kind of like that if you look at Resident Evil 2, they take it even further. Now I understand the correlation of video games need to be bigger and better with each one, but if you think about it, there is kind of that underlying commentary of, okay, these corporations are evil, and yet they're not being checked. Because it keeps going. They go to, well, 3 is still set in the same time, but then you go to Code Veronica, and then you go to 4, which actually I'm going to touch upon real quick, because a lot of fans were upset with how they ended the Umbrella storyline in that game, where it was like, alright, they're done. Their stocks dropped, they had no money, which to me made more sense. So, what do you think?
Their stocks dropped and everything, but the thing is, Umbrella Corporation had their fingers in so many pies. They were basically puppet masters to actual countries, for that matter. And even though they were puppet masters, they still don't go away. There's still remnants, like pocket cells of Umbrella Corporations, because they think, oh, like the higher guy's up, so that must be I'm in charge and I'm going to do whatever I want. Plus, you got to think, if they were so vast, they still have facilities out there with all these dangerous biological weapons, including zombies, for that matter, or the dead still living. It's like, they're still out there to be found, so it could cause another outbreak. So they can't just be gone.
Well, I mean, what I mean by that is, for them to keep operating, they still have to be taking in money. And they were a public... I think, if I remember correctly, they're a publicly traded company in the game universe. And if they're not getting money and their stocks crash, they're going to go bankrupt and they're going to die.
They kind of damage their own mythos doing that way, especially when they expanded globally. Like spreading the T-virus globally, because the thing is, if they're a globally traded company and they have to have money involved, don't you have to have living human beings to work, make money, trade, market? So making everyone infected with the T-virus basically shot themselves in their own foot.
Well, let's back up for a moment, because like you said, they kind of backed themselves in the corner with a story. To me, it's also the concept of, let's be honest, the mid-90s were not an era where we sat around thinking, well, is this going to be going on to be this big franchise?
Yeah, absolutely.
Today versus 1996 and 98, we did get Resident Evil 2 eventually, which, by the way, they originally had completed almost to like 80%, and then they ditched it and started over. But the idea of a sequel at that time was different than it is today. Sequels at the time were just sequels. Today, they're franchises.
Yes.
The sequels for having the namesake of just having a sequel.
Yes.
I mean, they never thought of connecting storylines and what's going to play out within like a 10-year plan. Like they do today with the Halo franchise, the Mass Effect series franchise, the Call of Duty franchise. No one thinks for the 10-year plan. You know what I mean? Especially back in those days, it was impossible. I don't think there was a single game back in the 90s that actually did that.
I can't. I mean, yeah, you're right, and I think that's like a huge difference of today, where definitely story-wise, and I think Resident Evil is one of those games that you can look at and say, okay, that game, I personally feel that the story really has gotten overboard with just all these different elements coming in from all the different sides, and I think it kind of makes it kind of fall apart personally. But
I agree with you with that. The first one was a great standalone game. The story really wasn't there unless you go through and find every single note, like we talked about in the first part of this interview. But when they started going through with Resident Evil 2 and beyond that, they added a little bit more story in, which was great. But as far as gameplay and footage, everything goes, I think Resident Evil really kickstarted that franchise. And I didn't expect there to be Resident Evil 2 after playing it for the first time. I just thought it's a great game. It's a game that stands alone by itself for that time era.
But I think there can be an argument made that, because it was a breakaway success.
It was, yes.
Like, these were huge games when they first started. These games are really a first of their kind, and not just in the survival horror sense, but in the sense of going for something bigger. I would make an argument that had Resident Evil not been what it was, we probably wouldn't have gotten Metal Gear Solid the way it was, where it was this large cinematic experience in the video game world. I think games like that probably would not have it. Eventually we probably would have gotten it, but maybe not like at that time in that way.
I agree with that because you said in the first part of this interview that they wanted to make it a first-person shooter, and eventually, over the course of 10 years or whatnot, they did make it a first-person shooter. I think it was called Resident Evil Survivor, if I'm not mistaken.
Eventually they did, yes.
Eventually they did, and that was probably one of their worst titles that people would go and say because it was a first-person shooter. It was not third-person. The suspense really wasn't there anymore. So I think they really kick-started and they really stuck to the guns about being a third-person shooter.
But not even just that, but I mean from story perspective, it was a pretty story-heavy game.
It was a story-heavy game, but like as far as trying to connect them between the actual sequels, it didn't really work.
Vague, but each one was still standalone.
Still in the same universe, but not really connected.
Before that, what games did we really have that had an emphasis on story like that? I mean, I guess Alone in the Dark kind of did begin that as well, but it wasn't as tight and well-focused. But like you had Tomb Raider, which was still a little bit of cutscenes here and there, some story, but it was like, all right, we're going to the next level.
Yeah.
Resident Evil had an amazing amount of story that made it really cinematic.
Yeah, I do agree with you, and I think the other game that I'm going to compare it to probably a couple times in this interview is simply Silent Hill. You know, you're a guy that's looking for his daughter the entire freaking game, and at that point, really, can you take it too far? And then they came out with the second Silent Hill, and it was almost a completely different plot line, which is great, but I think both the games stand alone by themselves. They did what they had to do. I mean, that was just an epic storyline in both games.
It was an epic storyline in both games, but I think Silent Hill had Resident Evil beat in a lot of aspects on story play because you were basically a detective. You were basically living the whole entire experience trying to find your daughter the whole entire time. And you were piecing together clues and running into other people that gave you clues based upon that. In Resident Evil, you basically had no one other than like finding scraps of bits of information here and there, and you'd run into hordes of zombies every other room. You know, I mean, you had to find a final conclusion.
The clues and the puzzles in those two games as well really brought the aspect of you're playing it, but you're also learning how to play the game, and then you're also learning how the story goes. Because it really sucks going from one end to the map all the way to the other just to pick up a single diamond to throw it in a clock, or find this piece of notepad so you can put two pieces of paper together to figure out what the heck is going on, where you have to go in the game to the next part.
All right. Well, I think for now this is going to wrap up this particular video. I do want to do one more at least because I think I have a couple more questions I actually want to talk about gameplay-wise. All right?
Let's do it.
See ya! What you did? I can't do it.
You call mine cheesy?